What happens to a community when the people in power realizes nobody is watching them? We gonna get into it. Let's get it! Welcome. First of all, welcome. This is Unsolicited Perspectives. I am your host, Bruce Anthony, here to lead the conversation in important events and topics that are shaping today's society. Join the conversation and follow us wherever you get your audio podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for our video podcast, YouTube exclusive content, and our YouTube membership. Rate, review, like, comment, share. Share with your friends, share with your family, hell, even share with your enemies. On today's episode, local newspapers are disappearing, government secrecy is expanding, and ordinary citizens are being forced to uncover the truth on their own. But that's enough of the intro. Let's get to the show. I've always had a deep respect for journalism because at its best, journalism is about searching for truth, revealing the truth, pointing out hypocrisy, and standing up for the people who don't always have the power or the platform to stand up for themselves. And I think somewhere along the way, we've started confusing commentary with journalism. Opinion segments, debates, and people arguing their personal point of view can be informative and entertaining, but that's not the same thing as doing the work to uncover the facts. True journalism is not about finding facts that support your argument that you already wanted to make. It's about finding the evidence wherever it leads, and even when the truth is uncomfortable, inconvenient, or challenges what you already believe. That work becomes even more important at the local level. When local newspapers disappear, we don't just lose sports scores, community announcements, or coverage of city council meetings. We lose people whose job it is to pay attention. We lose reporters who know the neighborhoods, understand the history, recognize the people in power, and notice when something doesn't add up. And when nobody is paying attention, entire communities can be ignored, overlooked, or left to fall through the cracks. How are we supposed to understand people, let alone empathize with them, when we do not truly know what is happening in their communities? How can we recognize injustice, corruption, or neglect when there is nobody there to document it? For 20 years, Miranda Spivack covered government and corporate accountability at the Washington Post. During that time, she watched local newspapers disappear one by one and began asking a simple but unsettling question: what happens to a community when nobody is left to cover City Hall? What she discovered led her to ordinary people who decided to start asking questions themselves. Her book, Backroom Deals in Our Backyards, follows 5 people who had no press credentials, no legal teams, no special access. They simply believed something was wrong, began searching for the answers, and refused to stop digging. In this conversation, Miranda and I are going to explore what journalism is supposed to do, what happens when local institutions are allowed to operate without meaningful scrutiny, and why ordinary citizens are increasingly being forced to fill the gap left behind when reporters disappear. Without further ado, journalist, former Fulbright scholar, and author, Miranda Spivack. As I said at the top, I'm here with Miranda Spivack, author of Backroom Deals in Our Backyards, How Government Secrecy Harms Our Community and Local Heroes Fight Back. Miranda, thank you so much for joining the show. We are going to be talking about something that's near and dear to my heart, and that is journalism. And that is also fighting for the little person. And you have this book where you have 5 people who fought for themselves. So I'm really interested to hear about that and just about your take on journalism in whole. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks, Bruce. It's great to be here.
Normally I start the show with saying, let's go back and tell me about your background and your childhood and stuff like that. But I am going to steal a line from one of my favorite movies called Brown Sugar. And in that line, the journalist would ask anybody in the music industry when they fell in love with music. So I'm going to ask you, Miranda, when was it that you fell in love with journalism?
Well, that's a great question, actually. So I would have to say that it was probably in high school in Fairfax County, Virginia. And then not in college because I was like watching this profession even then, and this is eons ago, start to really decline. And also, my father was a journalist in Washington, D.C., and he died when I was a freshman in college of a
Mm,
heart attack. And I
mm.
just understood, I think, just what a stressful occupation this could be. So, of course, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. However, however,
So hold on.
however, okay.
You thought journalism was too
Right.
stressful, so you decided I'm going to be a lawyer. Okay, in
Right.
Washington D.C.
Yeah, well, forget that too. So what happened actually was that I was between my junior and senior years of college, I got a job on a small newspaper. Had a great editor. I probably one of the best editors I've ever had.
Mhm.
And then I was like, "Oh man, this is too much fun, you know. This is what I'm going to do." I was resisting it, but I'm going to do it. So that, it goes way back. And I've been a journalist for 40 plus years. Really never strayed from the profession.
Well, you worked for the Washington Post for over 20 years?
Yeah, about 20. Yeah.
About 20 years. And while you were at the Washington Post, you saw local newspapers start to disappear.
Right.
This probably happened in the late 90s going into 2000s when the internet is really taking shape. I know living in the Washington D.C. area, going to the University of Maryland,
Yeah.
riding the metro back and forth, it was very easy for me to get that Washington Post before I hop on the metro and read it. When did this disappearing of local newspapers, though? When did that start to cause alarm for you?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it does coincide a lot with the growth of the internet, the failure, I think, of news organizations, including the Post, to really understand what this was going to mean. And then actually, it was Craigslist that really killed
Mm.
off local news because it sucked up all the local ads. And those little classified ads that you used to see in newspapers, those were worth about $100 a box. I mean,
Oh,
they were
wow.
very, especially at the Post, but smaller newspapers, but they were very valuable. And
Hmm.
they were also a way that communities communicated, frankly, with each other. I mean, journalists are always like, oh, advertising, blah, blah, blah. But actually, it's another I wouldn't call it local news, but it's another form of local communication. So you know what the local bookstore is doing. They don't exist anymore. Where you could buy clothes, where you could buy groceries, whatever. And so when Craigslist and the guy who started that actually has done a lot of philanthropy subsequently for local news because I think Craig Newmark feels guilty about it, but as opposed to Jeff Bezos who doesn't care. But I think it goes back to the early 2000s. The internet was really starting to come on. And I remember this debate. I was at the Post starting in 1998, and there was a whole internal debate about sort of what to do. And Steve Call, who was then the managing editor and left, it's kind of, I think, in frustration, but he saw it coming. And, much as I love the Graham family, and I do respect and admire them a lot, that I think that everybody was a little behind on this. And then when Bezos bought the paper, he really started to diminish the local coverage, which continues now. It's been eviscerated. But this is also playing out in communities all around the country. It's not just the DC, the DMV, as we call it. It's not that. It's really going on everywhere. And it's really the loss of local advertising and local businesses. So
Mm.
Amazon hits you in two ways.
Yeah.
They suck up all your local business. They took the book industry. You can get anything you want from Amazon, including groceries. So why should I have to go to the grocery store? DoorDash. I mean, all this stuff is, people are living on the internet now.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think a lot of people look at newspapers as and their source of revenue as subscriptions, but no, it was ads and I didn't even think about the community advertisements that would be in the newspaper for jobs or people selling stuff. It's almost as if Craigslist, as you say, started it, but didn't like the Nextdoor app where communities are literally speaking to one another
Yeah.
and they're
Yeah.
advertising what has gotten rid of Craigslist. So
Right.
that's another
Right.
aspect of that extension.
Right.
But so when this is happening to the Washington Post, these local newspapers are disappearing because that ad revenue is
Right.
disappearing. What
Right.
is happening to the local news and the community at large when these
Right.
newspapers are disappearing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's sort of what my book is about too, because what happens, local news, people see themselves in the newspaper, or they see their neighbors in the newspaper, or they see high school sports in the newspaper. These are all community unifiers,
Mhm.
public issues that are discussed in the newspaper, covering the city council, the school board, public school issues, whatever. So when they're not being reported on, I think it's sort of a chicken and egg, but I think it fractures the community. The community looks for other ways to communicate that aren't as verifiable. I mean, I'm
Mm,
sorry, but all this stuff on Facebook and elsewhere that people post without even checking it. It's who knows, what is really true anymore. So, which of course Trump has played on tremendously, but it just community listservs. I mean, when I went to research my book, which was about 5 local communities where the news organizations are basically gone, except in
mm.
one case, and it's local people who step in and step up and discover a problem in their community and go about trying to solve it, frankly, without much media coverage. And, this is what's happened is I think that civilians, as I call them, they're not lawyers, they're not journalists, they are, to the extent that they are able and have time, they are stepping in and filling the void. But, they're not all, I'm not saying that they're dishonest, but they're not verifiable communicators. And, journalism is a profession, despite what people think. And certainly, every news organization I've worked at, which was local all the way to national, we worked very hard to be accurate. And when we made a mistake, we owned up to it. And I think that doesn't happen now with all this stuff on the internet. So if you're somebody interested in an issue, you really have to look long and hard to find the truth.
So, Miranda, the audience knows this, but you don't know this. My first major at the University of Maryland was journalism.
Oh,
I
well, we
wanted
won't
to be
hold
a
it
journalist.
against you.
I loved and wrote for this a little while for the school newspaper, and both in high school and college. I ended up being secondary education and history, but more importantly, is a researcher. Those jobs are researchers,
Right,
and it's not about proving your thesis. It's about finding the truth,
right,
whether the truth leads you to back up what you believed or sends you down a path where
right,
you're like,
right.
I was wrong. And a lot of people, though well intentioned, as you say, don't have that training because it is absolutely a profession. Me as a researcher, still can't be a journalist because there are other aspects of journalism that I did not learn. I had a problem when writing with not having my personality come out.
Mm.
And they're like, "You're a columnist.
Yeah,
You're an
right.
opinion
This is
person.
opinion, that's
Yeah,
not fact.
you can't write just facts because your voice always comes out." How can people that are getting information from Facebook, that are getting information from people who aren't journalists, even the ones that are on TV that speak
Right,
for a living,
right.
how can they decipher or research on their own and find out what is truth and what is opinion?
That is a hard question to answer. And the reason is that AI is taking over the internet now. And I mean, I've looked at stuff that I know from either my own work or experience or whatever, and you put it into AI and it spits out gibberish and, bad information in, bad information out. It's
Mhm.
not a big mystery why this isn't working. So, I think the public library and the librarians, frankly, are great sources of how to verify information and how to get information. They also have access to online databases that are fact based. And that, frankly, I would, hooray for librarians. I mean, I would go to the public library, which you can also reach online through your library card. But, that's certainly one way. I think there are news organizations, I would in particular point to the New York Times, that I think still do very good work. I full disclosure, I have freelanced for them, but I do think they're a step above pretty much everybody else in this country. So, yeah, I mean, they are not perfect, but they really do. For example, this whole story about Trump's airplane that needed to be retrofitted, which
Mm,
nobody wanted to admit why he wasn't flying back from the fancy Qatar gift plane
mhm.
from Turkey and from NATO. Well, the Times got that story. And now they're being sued, basically, or pursued by the administration because, obviously it was based on some kind of classified information, or at least secret information if it wasn't classified. That's the reaction of the government to truth, when actually the Times performed a public service by alerting everybody to the fact that this plane wasn't safe for the president of the United States. Why would you argue against that? And it turns out to be true because, of
Yeah.
course, they're now taking the plane out of service and retrofitting it. So I will say, you have to really know your sources. So I would say the New York Times is a good source. I think there are other good sources, but also, trust but verify. Go to the library, get access to their stuff, and try your hardest. And you talk to people. I mean, when I'm a journalist, I interview people, but you know what? I don't take everything they say at face value. I
Hmm.
use that as an opportunity to look elsewhere for information. But it's a
Yeah.
it's a process, and certainly sharing stuff on Facebook without verifying it is just irresponsible.
Yeah. Going back to the loss of local news and local newspapers, what what happens in city government, or what does city
Mhm.
government do differently the
Right,
moment they realize
right.
nobody's
Nobody's
watching them?
watching.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, that is a huge issue around the country. And that's why these accidental activists, as I call them in my book, who become the community watchdogs, I mean, they show up. They are at the city council meetings, or they are asking for documents and data from the government, which you're entitled to get under most state public records laws. But when they're not there, nobody in the community knows what's going on. And
Mm,
when the local reporter goes away or is too overworked or is discouraged from attending meetings, which frankly was happening at the Washington Post, where I was just say, oh, come on. When I go to a meeting, yes, 90% of it I'm not going to write about. It's not interesting to our readers, but there's that 10% that if I
mhm.
weren't there, I wouldn't hear.
Right.
So, it takes a lot of legwork to do this, but this is, what's happening is that governments know nobody's watching, and that's when all the backroom deals start to occur.
Okay, I wanna go back to specifically the Washington Post. Why would the Washington Post fight against sending a reporter to these, local town halls and meetings and things like that? Is it purely just an economic situation where they don't wanna pay, or do they feel like that news isn't important or isn't salacious enough to sell newspapers?
What I'm talking about really occurred 15 years ago. I
Mhm.
I couldn't even talk to you really about the Washington Post in its current iteration because they basically gutted local news completely. It was already on its way out, but the last 6 months, they've laid off hundreds of reporters, many of them on local news. So going back, I would say 15 years, when people were discouraging reporters from hanging out at meetings, I think it was this the best use of our time? Was it going to be salacious enough? We don't want meeting stories in the paper, they're boring. Well, I always had a different view, which was you gotta hang out, you gotta listen. I got one of my best stories being at a planning board meeting about this fancy secret art gallery in Montgomery County, Maryland, where, there was millions of dollars, billions probably, of exclusive art that wasn't open to the public. But the owner, Mitch Rales of the Danaher Corporation, wanted a sewer. So suddenly he had to go into the public domain. And then, I wrote about this guy, and he actually gave me an interview, which annoyed the hell out of our business reporters who had tried for years to get an interview with him and he'd never done. I said, well, I cover local news. He went to sewer. That's why.
Mhm.
But, I just never agreed with that. I think it was a time management thing and also a desire for the big story. But big stories come out of building little stories.
Right. Yeah, I always tell people when I was a student teacher and I was teaching history, and people would say history is boring. I would say, no, it's not, because you love the History Channel. You love documentaries. It's just the way that you teach history. If you teach it in
Yeah.
storytelling,
Yeah.
people will be interested in it. Local or the small stories do often turn into big stories, and you watch on Netflix all the time. It's these little stories in these little small towns
Right.
that become these big documentaries, that become these kind of pop culture phenomenons, and it starts by local reporting.
Right.
What is this? What is the common thread? You've got data centers, you got water systems, you got courtroom algorithms, you got dangerous roads. What is all this thread? Is this all coming out of these backroom deals because these city government officials are no longer being watched because the local reporter isn't there to watch them?
I think that is generally the case. Certainly in the case of data centers, which are proliferating all over the country,
Hmm.
and are generally those agreements have been made with state and local governments to often they're looking for tax breaks actually, which, can really tick people off. So if your government's going to give away a big tax break or sell land at a discount or whatever to a data center that arguably uses a lot of electricity and a lot of water and maybe puts too much stress on the local resources, uh, governments might want to do that deal behind closed doors and often do because they sign these non-disclosure agreements, which are also proliferating around the country. And I, find them sort of shocking that government officials would agree to that. But what's happening is these companies, Amazon, Microsoft, all the big ones, are holding that over local governments and saying, we're not coming if you don't sign this NDA, this non-disclosure agreement.
Hmm.
And then the question is, okay, so you get a data center, which is this behemoth, noisy, energy sucking thing. Is it producing enough jobs, good jobs, well paying jobs to make it worth it? Or is it sort of like a warehouse, which, in Prince George's County, where I worked for a long time for the Post, that was what was happening there is they were just getting warehouses. They weren't getting well-paying, jobs. And so that's sort of the next question. If the government is going to give away all this stuff and do it in secrecy, what are the people getting out of it? And that's a lot of what my book was about, which was these secrets were being agreed to, whether it was a non-disclosure agreement or a dangerous road, as you say, and documents about car accidents and other data. What's the public benefit to that? And that's really the question. And I think the hard answer for governments is we don't really know. We're just sort of being held up by these companies, and we're afraid because if we turn them down, then maybe we are going to lose jobs. And it's very murky. But the common thread is that I think the governments it's easier to do stuff in secret. You don't have the annoying public looking over your shoulder. And
Hmm.
there's no question the public can be annoying, but it's usually because 'cause they're so frustrated that they just lose it. But, I think those NDAs should just be outlawed across the country, and then it would be an equal playing field. So if the data center company wants to come in, no, nobody's gonna sign an NDA with you. You can stay here or you can go next door, but nobody's signing an NDA.
I, so these NDAs are recent, right? And are they specifically just for like local governments? Do state and federal agencies also sign NDAs with
Yeah.
major corporations?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what I have researched and what I know is state and local.
Hmm.
There is actually, the Trump administration is trying to get federal employees to sign NDAs just so they won't leak, I guess. But, I can speak to state and local, really. They are proliferating and they are being signed by state governments, local governments, small municipalities. And, these big corporations are coming in and saying, we want all these things from you. And it's, we don't want to tip off our competitors. That's what they claim is the rationale. And there's something to that. I can't deny that.
Mhm.
But at some point, much earlier in the process, this stuff should become public. So the public has a chance to weigh in and say, maybe we don't want that energy guzzling data center next door.
Picture me naive and the audience naive. What is the benefit for these government officials to sign these
Well,
NDAs for these
well, yeah.
uh, corporations?
Well, it ranges. I,
Hmm.
I think it can be that they're saying we've brought a lot of good jobs to our community and think you should be thanking us, and then is somebody putting cash in their pocket? I mean, that's always the question, it seems to me. What is the benefit? Or is it a lobbyist who takes you on a fancy boat ride on on the Great Salt Lake, which somebody just told me about yesterday? It may not be cash. It could just be a good meal. Who knows? But I think public officials, all of whom are guided at least by ethics laws and regulations, just need to feel more comfortable turning down this stuff because they are representing their communities. They're not representing Amazon.
Hmm. These type of things have been happening, though. Like we could go all the way back to Tammany Hall, right, and the
Yeah,
corruption
yeah.
that was there. It, it, I don't know if you have data one way or the other. Can you pinpoint an increase of these type of, I don't know if it's completely corruption, but definitely on a borderline type of local government corruption since the local reporter and the local newspapers have disappeared? Is there an uptick, or is it just this is the way it's always been? Maybe people's eyes are open a little bit more to it.
Yeah, very good question. I don't have data of my own, but there have been some recent studies that have come out and shown that when local news disappears, corruption of one sort or another rises. And also that costs to governments rise because their bond ratings change for some reason. There's
Hmm.
skepticism about how reliable their finances are. So, there's a cost that way, according to these studies, and there's also, some kind of increase in corruption. What I have been able to document myself is an increase in secrecy.
Hmm.
That I think has gotten worse over the last 20 years or so. And so what does that mean? Why are people keeping secrets? Which is exactly what you asked me. And the answer is fear. It's potentially corruption. It's just the difficulty of having to deal with the public when you are under-resourced, which most local governments are, because state legislatures don't pony up enough money for them usually.
Hmm.
It's a combination of factors, but the bottom line is that state and local governments usually go into a defensive crouch, and it's just easier to push the public away. It's easier not to give out documents and then have a member of the public fight back as opposed to giving out something incorrectly and then getting sued for it. I mean, a
Hmm.
lot of it is fear, I think, but it doesn't help. And it doesn't help communities understand what's going on in their communities and mount a campaign either to support it or oppose it. Without information, you're stuck.
Yeah. Speaking of communities, it seems like there might be a little bit of a correlation between the communities that are hit hardest when local press disappears and those communities usually being the ones that have the least power to fight back.
It is
Is
true.
this coincidence or is this by design?
Well, God, it's probably both. I think that is absolutely true. One of the communities in my book is Uniontown, Alabama, which is an historically Black community, very, uh, low employment, low income, you name it, has a big catfish plant there. And that is a source of jobs, no question about it. And the catfish plant is one of the, what I would say, overusers, the community would say polluters, of the water and sewer system. And they have been cited for it, but they usually get a slap on the wrist, and it's not a big fine. And as a percentage of their costs and income, it's not a lot. And so this continues. And when the community members there have tried to speak up, they have been shut down at every turn, either by the federal government, which is funding some of the change improvements supposedly, or by the state government, which, they go to Montgomery to try to lobby themselves and can't even get a moment to speak at a public meeting. It's a mix, but I would say that low income communities of color, which aren't necessarily the same,
Right.
are harmed a lot by the secrecy. And it is, it's interesting. I theorize a little bit myself because I worked as a white person in Prince George's County, Maryland, which is a majority Black community, majority minority community, that there is a lot of residual hesitation about speaking up, and that it goes way back. I mean, it goes back, to Jim Crow, and that some of the folks living there who I would write about or interact with in the government are don't see their role, or they're afraid of being shut down. Whereas in a white community, or a more white community like Montgomery County, Maryland, across the way, not too far away, community activism is sort of par for the course. And people are accustomed to it, and they believe they have a voice. And, this is total theory, and I haven't documented it. It's just a gut feeling based on what I saw.
Yeah. Let's get to your book. We've been talking about your book. Let's get more in depth about your book. You've said it, that the people in your book had no credentials. They weren't lawyers. They didn't have any press pass before they went out to start to get proof. What did that feeling actually feel like for them while they were in that process?
Yeah, it's a tough process. It's, first of all, I mean, and you mentioned some of the issues. It was, poison drinking water, dangerous roads. These are everyday issues that I think every community might encounter. Toxins in firefighter turnout gear, hidden algorithms in the criminal justice system, which are being widely used and abused. And as I said, the sewer system in Uniontown, Alabama. And what happens is that people in the community, either something has happened to them, which is the case of the poison drinking water. Michael Hickey's father died of a weird form of cancer, and he just began researching this. He was so bereft. This is in Hoosick Falls, New York, a small community outside of Albany. And he's able to discover that there are forever chemicals in the drinking water, and he's able to trace it back. It takes a long time. And what happened to Michael was, initially, he was very cautious, and he wanted documentation and proof. And when he went to the mayor said, "Oh, don't tell anybody because it's going to give our community a bad reputation." Of course, if you allow people to move into the community and they discover there's poison drinking water, that would be a lot more serious, it seems to me, than a bad reputation. But so he got pushed back that way. When he eventually was able to prove his point, which he did by getting the water tested himself, and then also learning to use public records and getting documents and data that showed that the state of New York was aware of this problem long before they went public with it. But it was unpleasant. I mean, on the one hand, the mayor was saying, "Don't tell anybody." And on the other hand, when the neighbors found out what he knew, they said, "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Which is understandable, but it's very tough. Or Diane Cotter, who's another forever chemical person, from Worcester, Mass. Her husband got prostate cancer. He was a firefighter. She began through a very long process of research, and she's a high school graduate, no experience at all doing this, began to recognize that were forever chemicals in firefighter protective gear, and that it was conceivable still not proven, that the gear that was supposed to protect them was actually also one of the many sources of poisons that
Wow.
firefighters encounter. I mean, going into a burning building, you're going to inhale a lot of junk, and it's a dangerous job, and the rate of cancer in the fire service is higher than the general population. But she took enormous amounts of grief from the industry, from the union, until the union finally came around to her side, and public officials wouldn't give her the time of day, and, really labored alone for a long time. There was also competition with other people who were discovering similar problems, and then who was going to get the credit, and just kind of ugly stuff. And I think that, you have to be a certain personality, which is you have to be angry because you're getting rebuffed. You have to be really tenacious. You have to really understand, as all these people did, how to do research. Huge, huge. I mean, Diane was reading, and Michael were both reading chemical studies, in very complicated language that they learned to decipher. And then you have to learn to organize your community, which ultimately they have done, and learn to lobby, and learn, the value of public shaming, which is where local news comes in. If you
Right.
can't get somebody to cover this and embarrass the public officials who've been ignoring this problem, what do you have? But, Diane used Facebook not so much to get the word out about what her findings were, but as a communication tool. I mean, she sent 22,000 emails over time
Jeez.
to various public officials and firefighters, and, began to build a movement. And actually, that one's been relatively successful. A lot of cities and communities are now trying to buy gear that does not have forever chemicals in it, but is still going to protect firefighters.
You said a lot of the people, or at least two of them that you mentioned, got access to public records. Does the public technically have access to the records that they can hold the government accountable?
Th- Yes, and this is actually a big part of the last chapter of the book, which is sort of a how-to chapter called The Playbook for Accidental Activists. And I talk a lot about public records. I think what I've discovered as a journalist, I know how to do this, and that
Hmm.
certainly was part of my work over time. But most people don't, and they don't realize that if you go to the city council meeting and they hold up a document and they're say, we have this study, that becomes public immediately. You
Mm,
can get that. You should get that. You don't have to rely on whatever they're telling you it says. You can go get it. Contracts, police reports. I mean, all of this stuff should be available to the public. Citations by environmental agencies against, you know, various polluters. Those things are public. You have to know where to get them, and you have to figure out how to ask for them. But in general, every state, territory, you name it, and the federal government have public records laws, and the advice to governments by the law is to err on the side of transparency.
mm. I want to talk about the people in your book and accessing of these records because I talk to a lot of people just in my personal life, and they're always coming to me, "Hey, Bruce, did you hear about this story? Did you hear about this? Did you hear about that?" And me being the naturally wanting to question everything person that I am would say, "Well, that doesn't sound right. What did the article say? What did this news report say? Oh, I don't know. I just read the headline."
Mhm.
What type of a person is a person that will go and search out these records, that will go and read these complex documents when they only have a high school education, go through it, figure out what it's trying to say, learn from it, and keep on digging? Because it seems like as technology grows, we're becoming more and more dependent on technology and becoming lazier and lazier or
Mm.
doing the things that we actually do. People all the time say, I read a book. No, you listened to a book. You didn't actually read the book. So, what type of person is it that will go get these documents and keep on fighting?
I don't think these people knew that they were any particular type of person at the outset of their discovery of problems in their community.
Mm,
But as I watched their stories unfold, and a lot of this I watched as it was occurring, and, sort of wondering how these problems were going to be resolved. And that's pretty much what the book is about. And in the case of Uniontown, Alabama, the problems still are not resolved. And I had to sort of leave that chapter hanging because of, I think anger is a big driver here. And I think the minute you get pushback from either a local company or, you're on hold for 3 hours trying to solve a problem or whatever, you begin to think the system is completely messed up. And when I went to the city clerk's office and I said, I want to see the contract that you have with so-and-so who's picking up my trash, except they're not picking it up. And you're told, oh, it's going to take months to dig out that contract, which of course is illegal because the maximum state response is 30 days. The federal response is 20. And a lot of communities and cities and states will have to respond in 10 days. Doesn't mean they have to give you what you're asking for, but at least they have to acknowledge that you have made a request and that they're trying to fulfill it. But I think anger and frustration really drive them. And they're also, there's a cliche, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. And it's not turning out to be the case. And I think people are a little surprised by that and turn out to be crusaders in a way that they never even knew they had it in them. And I think it's an evolutionary process for people. I hope the last chapter of the stories of my book, I think, explain this all, but the last chapter in particular, if you were to scroll to that, you would say, okay, do this, 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 and this, and this is how you can do it.
What is the toll it takes?
High.
This fight that they go through. What is the toll it takes on them personally?
Yeah, it's a lot. I would be lying if I didn't say these people suffered. I think they did suffer, and they are suffering. And that's a choice you got to make. What is it worth to you to solve this problem? Can you get help from your neighbors and shoulder some of the responsibility, which Richard Baltuck in Maryland did when he was trying to sort of deconstruct this situation where the state of Maryland's transportation department was refusing to give him information that your tax dollars had paid for. It was just, anyway, it just, it's hard work. He was able to get his neighbors together and do a lot of the research. And Diane somewhat has been able to do that. Michael Hickey pretty much operated alone for a long time. His marriage broke up. I don't know if it was related or not, but these are tough circumstances. And when you have the weight of the government and private corporations arrayed against you, that, you really have to think hard. Is this worth my time? Where am I going to come out on this? Am I just going to be defeated by the end?
Financially, it costs as well, right?
It
Because
does.
you said
Time is money.
the gentleman in New York had to personally pay for the water to get tested.
He did.
Is there any type of, when he proves it, a reimbursement by the government?
That's a good question. There have been some settlements in that case with the big polluters. And so individuals, including Michael, got some money from those settlements. I don't think it ever will compensate him for his time. It's probably like a penny an hour or something like that. But that settlement wasn't because he unearthed the problem. The settlement was because these companies were accepting some form of responsibility for the pollution and therefore paying damages, essentially. But, Ben Eaton in Uniontown, Alabama, he has just taken all kinds of grief. And yet he persists and has really worked hard and has built something of a coalition, so that helps. But the only way you're going to get money back, and it would usually be your lawyers, is if you filed a lawsuit for a public records case and they turned you down, but in the end they had to give it to you because you went to court. And it, again, depends on the state. It's not true in every state. You can get some compensation. Usually goes to the lawyers' fees. But they always win.
You've been doing this for 40 years. And I
Actually,
know
look.
there's a little part that journalists, what we were taught. I think it was one of the first lessons that I learned. You got to remove your emotion
Yeah.
and you got to just be objective, get the facts. But hearing these stories, even for 40 years, has to affect you emotionally.
Yeah.
What does that look like for you on a day-to-day basis when you're getting new information and you're hearing these stories and these struggles these people are going through, but you have a job to do?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do
Well,
you deal with that?
yeah, it's an interesting question because some of what people in the book told me wasn't accurate, and I had to vet it, and I
Mhm.
did vet it, and I was able to correct it, and didn't write it. And it wasn't because they did that out of malice. I think they did it either they were trying to please me in a way, they wanted the story to go a certain way, or they just made a mistake. And, but it was innocent, I think. So, I'm always on the alert, I guess, which I suppose means a high state of, well, whatever, I don't know, tension, whatever.
Mhm.
You know, I I I certainly can empathize with these folks, but still try to tell their story straight. And you're raising an interesting issue because I am temporarily right now visiting my daughter and her family in Berkeley, California, where there is an enormous unhoused problem.
Mhm.
And this is an affluent community, and I'm sitting here, I mean, I'm gonna go to a city council meeting, I think, trying to figure out why aren't they solving it? Why are people living on the street and in doorways in certain parts of the city, not all, not in the more affluent part of the city,
Mhm.
but and I'm thinking, this is just insane. And I guess what my work has done is, I hope, enabled me to be a good citizen too.
Mm. What what goes through your mind when, for instance, the people that are telling you this story, it doesn't quite check out. It's not exactly what they said. You vetted it, and for whatever reason, they mess up the story, and you're like,
Yeah.
this isn't true what you told me, and
Yeah.
here's the
Yeah.
facts. Like, what is that like when these people are opening up to you
Right.
to come back and say, this wasn't completely
Right.
truthful what you
Right.
told me.
Right. Well, I mean, I have to be very straightforward about
Mhm.
that, and also because I want to re-verify, let them have a chance to say, okay, oh, maybe I
Mhm.
did mess that up, and here's how I got that information. But and then I'm saying, well, here's how I got that information. So let's try to match this up. I just think you have to be careful, and I don't. I would ascribe malicious intentions
Mhm.
to somebody who's more expert at this, a
Mhm.
member of Congress, for example, a
Right.
president of the United States, for example.
Mhm.
People lie regularly. But when you're dealing with people who are not experienced, and they're not experienced talking to a journalist either,
Right.
um, you just try to do your best and help them do their best. I think it is a relationship. It's not hostile in this case. And I'm just trying to help them tell their story. Not the best version of their story, but their
But their
story.
story. Yeah. You said you just wanna be a good citizen, and that's kinda the reason why you're probably gonna go to that city council meeting in Berkeley. It's probably also the reason why you wrote this book and the reason why you became a journalist at large. What is it that you want people to get from your book?
Well, I think that people generally don't have a sense of how much power they actually hold,
Mm.
and that public officials will listen. They will especially listen if there are 50 of you, not 2 of you. And so you need to learn to organize. You need to understand what you're entitled to, what your tax dollars have paid for that you are entitled to learn about, and that you can make a difference. And I think that's what the book shows, is that even in very difficult times, which we are in, you can make a difference, especially at the state and local level. And then when you do it there, whether it's an environmental issue or a safety issue or an education issue, it can ripple nationally. And
Mm.
so it's okay to start local. And that's where I think you can have the biggest impact.
Miranda, I think that's a perfect way to end this conversation. I love everything that you said. I just like speaking to journalists. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you so much for talking to us about your book. And thank you so much for talking to how we can be good neighbors to each other by just going and fighting the power, as Public
Yeah.
Enemy would say. But thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really my pleasure.
Oh, it was great. Thanks a lot, Bruce. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Before we end, I know, I'm going to harp on something that I said at the top that I reiterated in the interview, but I still feel like I need to continuously stress it, especially where we are in today's society. Real journalism is not about winning an argument. It's not about collecting only the details that confirm what you already believe. It's not a panel of people shouting over one another or a personality turning every story into a performance. Journalism, at its best, is the patient and sometimes uncomfortable pursuit of what is true. It is asking another question when the first answer does not make sense. It is checking the document instead of trusting the headline. It's following the evidence even when that evidence leads somewhere you didn't expect or forces you to admit that your original assumption was wrong. That work matters because the truth does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes the truth is sitting inside a contract that most people do not know exists. Sometimes it is buried in technical reports, government records, legal agreements, environmental testing, or a decision made in a meeting that almost nobody attended. And when local journalism disappears, so does one of the strongest lines of defense ordinary people have against being ignored. We lose the reporters who know the history of the neighborhood. We lose the people who recognize when officials' explanation doesn't match what happened last year. We lose the person sitting through the boring meeting long enough to hear the one sentence that changes everything. That is the reason why Miranda Spivack's work is so important. And Backroom Deals in Our Backyards. She doesn't only examine what institutions were able to conceal, she centers the people who refuse to accept that concealment. These were ordinary people whose lives were interrupted by something that felt wrong. They didn't begin with influence, advanced training, or a powerful organization behind them. They began with questions. Then came the research. Then came the resistance. Then came the moment when they had to decide whether being dismissed, criticized, isolated, or exhausted was enough to make them stop. And instead, they kept going. That doesn't mean that the fight was easy or that every problem was neatly solved. Some of these people paid a serious personal price for demanding answers. They sacrificed time, money, relationships, comfort, and pieces of their own peace. But their stories remind us that expertise can be learned. Public records belong to the public, and one determined person can force a community to confront something it would rather avoid. Miranda's book also reminds us that being heard is rarely just about having the truth. Sometimes you can have the evidence and still struggle to get anyone to listen. That's where journalism becomes more than an industry. It becomes a public service. It gives people language for what they are experiencing. It connects one person's struggle to a larger pattern. It places information in front of a community that powerful people may have preferred to keep scattered, confusing, or invisible. So I encourage you to support Miranda's work and pick up Backroom Deals in Our Backyards, How Government Secrecy Harms Our Communities and Local Heroes Fighting Back. Read it for the investigations, but also read it for the people. Read it for the person who noticed something was wrong. Read it for the person who was told to let it go. Read it for the person who kept searching after the institutions around them made truth difficult to reach. But here's the uncomfortable part people don't want to talk about. The people in power are not the only reason important truths remain hidden. Sometimes the truth stays hidden because the rest of us are too busy too distracted, too discouraged, or too willing to believe that someone else will do the digging. So the question is not only whether journalists will continue to search for the truth. They will. That's an easy question to answer. The real question is whether we will support them when they search for the truth, whether we will listen to the people fighting to be heard and have the courage to act once the truth finally reaches us. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for watching. And until next time, as always, I'll holla. Woo! That was a hell of a show. Thank you for rocking with us here on Unsolicited Perspectives with Bruce Anthony. Now, before you go, don't forget to follow, subscribe, like, comment, and share our podcast wherever you're listening or watching it to it. Pass it along to your friends. If you enjoy it, that means the people that you rock will enjoy it also. So share the wealth, share the knowledge, share the noise. And for all those people that say, well, I don't have a YouTube. If you have a Gmail account, you have a YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can actually watch our video podcast and YouTube exclusive content. But the real party is on our Patreon page, After Hours Uncensored and Talking Straight-ish. After Hours Uncensored is another show with my sister. And once again, the key word there is uncensored. Those are exclusively on our Patreon page. Jump onto our website at unsolicitedperspectives.com for all things us. That's where you can get all of our audio, video, our blogs, and even buy our merch. And if you really feel generous and want to help us out, you can donate on our donations page. Donations go strictly to improving our software and hardware so we can keep giving you guys good content that you can clearly listen to and that you can clearly see. So any donation would be appreciative. Most importantly, I want to say thank you for listening and watching and supporting us. And I'll catch you next time. Audi 5000. Peace.